Welcome to Truth is Freedom. I am Dennis Cummins here with Experience Church, and we have an exciting topic today, AI and domestic violent extremist. Are you a domestic violent extremist? You might be, according to Attorney General Bob Ferguson, which is running for, that's right, the governor of the state of Washington. And I have a special guest with me. He's back with us. His name is Mark Herr, the Center for Self-Governance. Mark, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here today. I know that you've been working hard.
Yes, like the rest of us, working hard to figure out what's going on with our country and what we can do to preserve it and keep it and make it better.
Yeah. I want to jump straight into this. First, let's hit this House Bill 1333. We know that this was used as a bargaining chip last year in legislation to be able to, for the left or the Democrats to be able to gain more traction with some other woke agendas. And so it was kind of just used as a bargaining chip. But here it is back on. You sent me the screenshot when he introduced it. And what was it, December 23rd at like 11 p.m.?
Yes. It's coming back in 2024 because the agenda is to prevent folks like us from being able to have differing opinions from their political agenda. So the Domestic Violent Extremism Commission is back on the table. Okay, and so let's rewind, because I know we talked about this last year, and after going through the holidays, I think a lot of people have amnesia. So let's help them understand this. That House Bill 1333 was coordinated in conjunction with Homeland Security and the FBI. So in 2022, the Attorney General put together a study called the 2022 Domestic Terrorism Study, which you can find online. And in it, you have these two labels, domestic terrorism and domestic violent extremism, are conflated together. Then underneath domestic violent extremism, there are several labels that are repeated over: white supremacy and anti-government. And they make a recommendation. They want to form a 2-year commission. What they say is made up of stakeholders, the experts, et cetera, et cetera. And so this commission will get together and identify the problem is according to their definition, and then recommend solutions, legislative, lawful solutions to solve what they are calling a problem. Now, what's really important. Go ahead.
This team, though, that you're talking about that they're pulling together, as we look at that, no Christians or Christian groups were recommended to be on that panel, right? It was just basically LGBTQ, Islam, Jewish, the whole gamut except Christianity.
So when they use the word stakeholder, what they mean by that is those who have a vested interest in whatever the thing is. Usually it's the system. And so they're referring to groups that they say are disproportionately affected by white supremacy and anti-government. And then on top of that is the label domestic violent extremism. And on top of that is domestic terrorism. What they use in their study is, number one, is FBI statistics based on the label domestic violent extremism. But last year, as we were told by certain members of Congress, that the FBI, through FBI whistleblowers, were overinflating the domestic violent extremism statistics. So right off the bat, the justification for the commission potentially is using flawed statistics. Number two, the word stakeholder, which you were referring to back earlier, who's invited to the table? What is the definition of stakeholder? And then number three, throughout the document, they are not clear on what the definition of extremism is. There's no legal definition. It is a broad term. It's very loosely defined. And so next week, if you're in charge, you could label them extreme. And then when they're in charge, they label you extreme. And so it becomes a religious, and I say religious, not just from the perspective of believing in a God,
right,
but their religion is driving their political agenda. And so they are in danger, Pastor, of becoming what they hate very rapidly. So our organization has a lot of concern about them forming this commission using these very, very loosely defined terms.
Yeah, a lot of ambiguity here, but let's dive into the ambiguity because it seems like some of their examples of a domestic violent extremist seems like, a conservative mom going to a school board meeting. Let's unpack that a little bit.
So we have to understand that this is not a Democrat problem or a Republican problem. This is a post-Civil War abolition progressivist problem. And so you think back to the Civil War, after the Civil War, so post-Civil War, a group of people still believed that the Constitution was structurally and systemically pro-slavery. And since that time, generationally, they have true belief that the Constitution of the United States, so moms showing up to school boards, exercising their parenthood concerns for whatever their issues are actually demonstrating sanitized racism or structural racism. And so this is the problem with them controlling these definitions without a true, okay, let's bring Pastor Cummins to the table. Let's bring LGBTQ to the table. Let's bring Islam to the table, or whatever, all of those groups. Mm-hmm. What does an extremist mean? And come to a common agreement of what extreme means. That is not happening. And our organization makes the case. It stems from their religious belief in post-Civil War abolition progressivism tied to social justice, social welfare, and abolition of slavery. Those in the 21st century look like what we see in the Domestic Violent Extremism Commission. And we have to be very clear, Pastor, about our intentions regarding racism from whatever side of the political aisle you come from.
Yeah.
One of their experts, Cynthia Idris Miller, is a member of the advisory committee of the Extremism Council for Southern Poverty Law Center and was counseling the Attorney General on creating their domestic terrorism study, which is recommending this commission. Now, it's really important to understand that Southern Poverty Law Center was silent on a legally designated terrorist organization with the October 7th attacks in Israel, where 1,400 people were killed, including little kids being stuck in ovens and things like that. Terrible things. And the silence is actually deafening because their use of the labels extremism, anti-government, white supremacist tied to domestic terrorism is extremely dangerous for due process, First Amendment, Sixth Amendment, Fourth Amendment, all the things that we talk about in the Constitution. But with the backdrop of what I said to you earlier, they do not believe that the Constitution is anti-slavery. They believe it is pro-slavery. And so when we look at their behavior and how they do this, they are coming from a perspective, and this is our organization's belief, they are coming at it from a religious perspective that they are doing a social justice service by dismantling the Constitution's sanitized racism, pro-slavery, structural, and systemically designed. They are working to dismantle it. We are sitting, when you have a mom show up to a school board, they see her as a threat to that behavior. Therefore, the word extremism, even though she's not extreme, she's a mom concerned about her kid. Okay.
Right.
They will label it extreme. Then they tie it to anti-government because they're rejecting the school policy. They will say that's anti-government. Our organization would also like to make the case, Pastor, is that the definition of anti-government, you would say that those moms are pro-government by showing up to the school board meeting. They would say that those moms are anti-government because they're threatening. The word threat is tied to extreme. The word extreme is tied to violence. Violence is tied to domestic terrorism. So we have to be really clear about the flow of meaning of words, what their belief system and their intrinsic objective. It has nothing to do with stopping white supremacy. Because if it was, they would have said, we reject all forms of racial supremacy, including Hamas or Zionism,
right,
or black this, or Asian that, or Hispanic this.
So let's jump back to that threat. So really what I'm seeing is they consider a threat any kind of opposition or disagreement, or if you don't genuflect, if you don't kneel and bow to their agenda, you're a threat.
Correct. If you in any way, shape, or form are trying to defend the U.S. Constitution that they believe is pro-slavery or structurally or systemically racist, then everything you do is sanitizing racism. Kind of, for example, the president of Harvard stepped down, but now it's racism that caused it. Again, we're tying into their psychology of what they believe. And the Attorney General and Cynthia Idris Miller, academics from American University and the Extremism Council for SPLC, Harvard University, and their incredibly misguided response to the Hamas extremism. I mean, we talk about extreme of baking a little child, baking a child in an oven. Extreme, right? There's what justification is there for at Harvard, SPLC, Attorney General Ferguson? Where is your condemnation of legally designated terrorism?
Yes.
While creating the impression that moms going to schools and exercising their petitioning, redress of grievance, which are all constitutional things. So if you don't comply, not with their agenda, it's not the agenda, Pastor, it's with the idea that in the 21st century, we are dismantling the Constitution because it is structurally and systemically racist. Anything you do counter to that is sanitizing your racism. And so understanding that from the beginning is critical to crafting strategy to dealing with what I would say is an attorney general who is a true believer. The Constitution is structurally and systemically racist.
Okay. Yeah. Let's look at that a little bit, because I mean, Governor Inslee and Attorney General Ferguson, they're two different. How do we say that? I don't say. I want to be cautious. Their thought process and their trajectory is completely different. And so if he's elected as governor, we're going to see a weaponization of government like we've never seen before, because they do see that the Constitution is a obstruction to their goals.
Structurally racist, and their progressive agenda is the critical piece here. So in the 1880s through the 1920s, the progressive movement tried to create a political party, but they failed. 1924 was the last time they tried to run a progressive party person. Eventually, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was part of that progressive movement, wore his Democrat jersey, got elected for 3 terms. So it's important to understand that there is a group of people with a political agenda that failed as a political party, and in the 21st century will wear whatever jersey they need to in order to advance that agenda. So if you look like you are supporting the Constitution, then you are sanitizing your racism, and you will be labeled a white supremacist, anti-government, domestic violent extremist with domestic terrorism and weaponized Department of Highway Patrol. I have evidence of a Highway Patrol document that lists an American citizen from the state of Washington as a domestic terrorist, as a member of a domestic terrorist organization in the state of Washington with no ties to China or Russia or any foreign organization. That is happening in our state, in the United States. And so organizations, people say, well, I'm not a terrorist. It doesn't matter. If they accuse you of sanitizing your racism, it doesn't matter whether you're Candace Owens, Clarence Thomas, Ben Carson. It does not matter what color skin you are. You could be Frederick Douglass, an ardent anti-slavery abolitionist, and be marginalized by these people in 1865 because he believed the Constitution was anti-slavery, and they did not. So their strategy is the same. Their tactics are the same. They added progressive ideology in the 1880s. That is the same. So their modus operandi, they may look like a Democrat, a communist to like Inslee or whatever, but the Attorney General himself, a true believer, Constitution is structurally racist, progressive agenda, and they have a strategy to carry it out. It's important for us to learn it and learn how to compete. So
obviously 1333 didn't come through last year in legislation, but like you mentioned, he doesn't even have to have this passed as a bill or a law, right? He can just simply get the funding to put this in place. Is that correct?
In terms of the rules of the state, every state's a little different, so it'll depend on what the rules are in the legislature. And if they give him the money to do it, that's a possibility. He's trying to get a law passed, or at least a resolution to recognize the commission and then fund it, because it'll have a fiscal note attached to it. So it depends on their rules and how they move it forward this year.
So with this coming forward, what caution signs, what alert level are you in seeing the weight that's behind this agenda for House Bill 1333?
I'll just go to the Secretary of State of Maine. The Secretary of State is connected to Southern Poverty Law Center and removed Donald Trump from the ballot because, again, he's a threat to democracy. It's hidden in white supremacy. She said this in 2021. She's connected to the Michigan Secretary of State Benson, who's a former employee of Southern Poverty Law Center. And Attorney General Ferguson is connected with Cynthia Idris Miller, who's an advisory member of the Extremism Council for Southern Poverty Law Center. So their reach, this organization's reach, is across from sea to shining sea. Their agenda is very clear: dismantle what they believe is a structurally, systemically racist constitution. So in terms of red flags, it's a really big deal. And it's important that the word stakeholder is clearly defined, that all groups are not marginalized, because then they become what they hate in the name of their religion. Bring everyone to the table. Let's be very clear on the definition of extreme, anti-government. Let's be very clear on the legal connection between domestic terrorism and domestic violent extremism. Based on what I told you about a Washington resident who was on a terrorist watch list and a terrorist member organization that is not legally authorized in the United States. And that's why I'm going to D.C. next week to make these cases to our federal delegation, as well as the Weaponization Committee, the Oversight Committee, the Select Committee on the Intelligence. So to answer your question, Pastor, my organization, it's very high on our radar.
So, and from a biblical standpoint, the Bible says, what fellowship has light with darkness? And, these two agendas cannot coexist, and they know it. They know that they cannot continue to grow and push their agenda if we are allowed the freedoms to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ in this country, because obviously the Word of God is anti-slavery and anti-racism, even though people have abused the word and used the word to try to push those agendas forward of slavery and racism. But we know that's just not proper exegetical applications of the Scripture. So this is very disconcerting, I think, for Christians, for churches that truly will hold that don't have the gay pride flag out in their foyer. And so my challenge, though, and what are you seeing as far as the ignorance or the ambivalence of churches, Christian leaders, pastors that really don't see this as a threat? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say two things. One is recently Senate Bill 5815 was passed. Forgive me. Mm-hmm. And this has to do with nonprofits that are Christian-based that are housing kids, either male or female or whatever. And the state, because of this, has been able to circumvent the meaning of words and start to infiltrate themselves into the private matters of legally created organizations that are fulfilling whatever their religious beliefs are in terms of charity and caring for kids. But the argument is the state has a vested interest in the child's welfare. So I would say to pastors or bishops or priests or whatever, all the different kinds of religions that are out there that believe in a higher power, that the post-Civil War abolitionists and progressivists do not believe in a higher power. They have a political agenda that involves weaponizing definitions in order to isolate you and marginalize you. And if you don't get involved, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Mm-hmm. These are very patient people. They're very strategic. I have a tremendous amount of respect for their political agility. They are fantastic political operatives. Do I agree with their method regarding the weaponization of labels in government? Absolutely not. And that's why I'm very vocal about it. Do I respect their First Amendment right? Absolutely. You want to call me a racist? You have every right. But when you weaponize government without due process, like Hitler did with the Jews, or like the Puritans did in the Salem witch trials, or like the Spanish Inquisition, mm-hmm. you are no different. You're no different than history, and you can't justify your religion good enough. And so any religion that's listening to this, please understand, these people are master political operatives. And when you don't compete, they do seize control of the meaning of words, and it is important. It's, from the Christian worldview, it's important to compete for the meaning of words. So I would encourage them to compete. Number one, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Yeah. It will touch you at some point. So
we're going to jump into our next session into artificial intelligence. And there's an interesting, I think, a dovetail here with being able to use technology to police people better. China's been way ahead of the curve on this, social scores and what have you. But really, what we see the DVE is policing words, and we see that bill, House Bill 1333, an attack against our freedom of speech, and outlawing certain values and faith or beliefs in things, and that comes with penalties. And I think about what happened with the pastors that stood against Hitler during World War II, and they were arrested and then they were executed because you can't speak out against the Reich. And I see shadows here of that. And the interesting thing that I see in House Bill 1333 is they want to weaponize the health department to use them to interdict in the situation, because those people, the DVEs, are a threat to public health safety.
Well, and they create they advocate for the creation of the civic education hub that would give people in the community the ability to report people they feel are being radicalized toward violence. And that is a very loose term. Yeah. One of the most disconcerting things here about this matter, and that working together with everyone in Washington on this matter, is that Southern Poverty Law Center, who is relied on as an expert, that our organization has uncovered their direct affiliation with Antifa using a database called Whack-A-Mole, which is an offshore database. And Antifa, I was on the phone today with somebody from Tennessee who was surveilled by Antifa, followed by Antifa, attacked by Antifa, had her dog attempted kidnapping, going to her place of working out like a gym, and jumping at windows. And so according to federal law, that is called coercion and intimidation, or at least the appearance to intend to coerce, intimidate. It's a violation of Title 18, the definition of domestic terrorism. But the lady told me, she says, I was afraid to call my police because they have a direct connection with SPLC. They're trying to hire SPLC intelligence analysts. She says, so I don't have faith that the law enforcement in my community is going to. So this is the disconcerting thing, Pastor, is that we must get a hold of this in terms of the equilibrium. So that is not just with Christian religions, but other religions that may not share the same doctrinal beliefs as the right. Christian faith. Even folks that have differing views, like moms. When I travel the country, moms will answer me when I say, when does motherhood end? 100%. Democrat moms, independent moms, Republican moms, non-voting moms, agnostic moms, they will all say motherhood never ends. Yeah. And so the thing is we have in common is regarding HB 1333 is when the label is weaponized, and there are no checks and balances, history is not kind when we do not participate in securing those checks and balances.
Right.
We've seen it with the Jews. We saw it with the Salem witch trials. You've seen it with the Spanish Inquisition, the African slave trade, the pogroms, the Trail of Tears, you name it. It doesn't matter what gender, race, whether it's Catholic, whether it was against indigenous people here in the United States. When labels are weaponized and government has no check and balance, it becomes dangerous. So that's the reason why we're talking to you about this today.
And one thing I want to point out, they call domestic extreme violent, DVE, domestic violent extremist. Violence, when we think of terrorism, we think of violence as physical force, shooting, blowing up things, physically accosting, stabbing, physical altercations. But what I'm seeing is what they deem violence is disagreement.
Yes.
And
so they use the phrase.
Let's be clear about that.
They use the phrase silence is violence. And the reason why is that they're saying that we're being radicalized to violence is because their political agenda is to dismantle the Constitution. So when we try to preserve it, then we are becoming violence. We're going to become violent. They need infrastructure through the Domestic Violent Extremism Commission to create the Department of Health and the regional health centers, as well as the civic hub entities, to be able to report on people from the community, because they don't have the staffing at the state level to monitor everyone's beliefs. But if you create the impression that in your community, your daughter or your son can, hey, I have somewhere I can call where I think my dad has gone over the top here. And you contact the civic hub, then they can have a mental health intervention to prevent you from being radicalized to violence.
This reminds me of the movie with Tom Cruise called Minority Report, and it like pre-crime. Let's interdict them before they become an extremist and they impose yeah, go ahead.
You are bringing up a very important legal doctrine that is shifting in the United States. We used to have a legal doctrine against entrapment where law enforcement can set you up, but there is a new legal doctrine that your audience should become aware of, and it's called the honeypot gaslight doctrine. That is, it is important for us to radicalize you first before the bad guys radicalize you and you go commit an act of violence.
Didn't we see some of this on January 6th with the federal FBI agents?
That is correct. We saw this with the Whitmer kidnapping case, Michigan. This happened with the Malheur Refuge in 2016. This happened with the Bundy standoff in 2014, et cetera.
Got it. So, yeah, and this is where we have to be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves to be on the tip of this.
Absolutely. And may I make one suggestion?
Please.
And that is, while we try to mitigate the existence of the Domestic Violent Extremism Commission with its bias, at least our argument is that it's a biased organization or a biased attempt to advance a political agenda, is that we need to create clear definitions of domestic terrorism, anti-government, and extremism in our state. It would be advisable for us to get together in our communities and start to bubble up the definitions of so that they are tangible, specific. What does extreme mean to all of us, 7 million of us in the state of Washington, not just to a small group of white radical abolitionists who believe that they have a social justice mandate to dismantle the Constitution without clear definitions of extreme, anti-government, domestic terrorism.
Well, let's face it, when you're a progressive, you love ambiguity because you can use it to your benefit. And we need context. We need clarity. And so, you know what? That wraps up our part one of this interview. And in our next interview, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and why is this a concern? It's here to stay. We're not going to be able to get the genie out of the bottle at this point. But Mark, thank you so much for being on. Mark, let's go back to you real quick. How do people get in touch with you, and why? Tell people why they would want to contact you, your organization.
Our main mission is not dealing with Attorney General Ferguson and the Domestic Violent Extremism Commission. Our main mission is to research and study and teach self-governance. What does it mean and how do we do it? We don't feel like we have the definition, so we're research. We feel like that through our classes, we're exploring, and that's kind of like what colleges do. You're constantly exploring the learning curve of things. And the second is what is our system of governance, and how do we work together with Attorney General Ferguson and others to fix our system? Even though Attorney General would never admit it, he doesn't want to fix our system. He'd like to convert it. I would love to work with him and any other American citizen, black, white, it doesn't matter, green, yellow, Mormon, whatever, agnostic. How do we work together to fix our system? That is our main mission of CSG. What is self-governance? What's our system? And how do we do it and work together?
Yeah.
When it comes to reaching out to us, if you want to go down that rabbit hole with our organization, go to centerforselfgovernance.com. If you want to learn more about the political weaponization of labels, which includes this DVE thing, go to the same website.com/PWOL, political weaponization of labels, PWOL.
All right. Thank you, Mark. We appreciate it. All right. That
Absolutely.
wraps up session 1 for Truth is Freedom. And next session, we're going to be talking about AI. Don't forget, like, share, subscribe, give us a review. Let us know what you like about this podcast. All right. Thank you, and God bless.